Get your things, Arthur. I've already called the Uber. It'll be here in 10 minutes, and I want you and that moldy suitcase off my porch before it arrives. I looked at my daughter-in-law, Sarah. She was standing in the foyer of the house I had paid for in cash 5 years ago, vibrating with a brand of arrogance that only comes to people who think they've finally climbed high enough to stop looking down. Behind her, my son Mark wouldn't even meet my eyes. He was staring at his expensive Italian loafers, the ones it bought him for his birthday, as if they held the secrets of the universe. "Did you hear me?" Sarah snapped, her voice cutting through the quiet of the morning. "You're a drain, Arthur. A useless, silent shadow in this house. I just landed a senior director role at Sterling Associates. My life is moving into the stratosphere, and I am not dragging a retired senile anchor behind me anymore." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply looked down at the notification on my phone. It was an encrypted message from my primary legal counsel. "The acquisition is finalized, sir. You now hold a 51 controlling interest in Sterling Associates via the Apex Trust, awaiting your signature on the restructuring mandates." I looked back up at Sarah. She was wearing a power suit that cost more than she used to make in a month, looking at me like I was a stain on her hardwood floors. She had no idea that the very company she was bragging about, the one she thought was her golden ticket to the elite, now belonged to the useless old man she was kicking out into the rain. "10 minutes, Sarah?" I asked quietly. "10 minutes," she hissed. "And don't bother calling Mark. He's already blocked your number. We're moving on to bigger and better things." I nodded slowly, picking up my worn leather bag. "You're right about one thing, Sarah. Things are definitely about to change to the world, and especially to my family. I am Arthur Vance, a quiet, 70-year-old widower who spends too much time in the garden and wears sweaters with holes in the elbows. When my wife passed away, I decided to simplify. I didn't need the penthouses in Manhattan or the fleet of blacked-out SUVs. I wanted to see my grandchildren grow up. I wanted to be a father to a son I had been too busy to raise during my years as a corporate raider. So I played the part. I moved into the guest suite of the suburban home. I gifted them, pretending to live on a modest pension. I became the useless grandfather who made pancakes and fixed broken toys. But greed is a funny thing. It doesn't just blind you, it makes you stupid. The friction started 6 months ago. Sarah had always been ambitious, which I initially respected, but that ambition turned into a poisonous form of elitism. She started seeing my presence as a social liability. When her high society friends came over, I was ushered into the back room. When they discussed investments at dinner, they spoke over me as if I were a piece of furniture. "Arthur, please don't chime in," Sarah would say with a condescending pat on my hand when I tried to warn them about the volatility of the tech sector. "This is high-level finance. It's a bit more complicated than balancing a checkbook at the grocery store." Mark, my own flesh and blood, just nodded. Along he had become a man who traded his backbone for a comfortable life, fueled by his wife's ego. The breaking point happened last night. We were sitting at the dinner table, a table I had shipped from Italy, celebrating Sarah's big break. She had been headhunted by Sterling Associates, a massive consulting firm that specialized in hostile takeovers and corporate restructuring. "It's a 7-figure package," Sarah bragged, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux. "Stock options, a discretionary fund, and a seat at the table for the upcoming merger with the Apex Group. Once Mark and I are selling this place and moving to the Heights, we need a lifestyle that reflects our status. The Heights is expensive," I remarked mildly, "and Sterling Associates has a reputation for high turnover during mergers. Have you looked into their restrictive covenants or the liquidation preference in those stock options? Sometimes the gold in a golden parachute is just spray-painted lead." Sarah slammed her glass down. The wine splashed onto the white linen. "That's it!" she screamed. "I am tired of your advice, Arthur. You worked in a middle management office 40 years ago. You know nothing about how the world works today. You're jealous because I'm achieving things you couldn't even dream of. You're a parasite living in our house, eating our food and throwing cold water on our success because you're a failure. Mark looked up, finally. Dad, maybe she's right. Your perspective. It's just not relevant anymore. It's embarrassing. When Sarah's new colleagues come over for the housewarming at the new place, we can't have you sitting in the corner in your corduroys talking about market fundamentals from the 1980s. So, what are you saying? I asked, my voice remaining level, saying, we need our space, Sarah said, her eyes cold. I've already found a very nice assisted living community about 3 hours from here. It's affordable. You'll have a room, 3 meals, and people your own age to talk to about the good old days. We're leaving for the new house on Monday. You need to be gone by then. I looked at my son Mark. Is this what you want? He looked away. It's for the best, Dad. We need to focus on our future. They didn't realize that I was their future, or rather, I held it in the palm of my hand. Sterling Associates had been on my radar for months. They were over, leveraged and bleeding cash after a failed attempt to short a lithium mining company. They were desperate for a capital injection. My holding company, Apex Trust, had been quietly buying up their debt for pennies on the dollar. An hour ago, I had authorized the final conversion of that debt into equity. I wasn't just a retired old man. I was the majority shareholder of the company. Sarah was about to join. I was her boss. As I walked out the door with my single suitcase, Sarah shouted one last thing after me. Don't bother asking for a recommendation. I wouldn't want anyone at Sterling to know I'm related to someone as pathetic as you. I didn't turn around. I just pulled out my phone and dialed my executive assistant, Marcus. Marcus, I said, my voice as cold as a mountain stream. Initiate a full forensic audit of the new hires at Sterling Associates. Specifically, the senior director role in the Northeast Division. I want a deep dive into her onboarding documents. And Marcus? Schedule an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. I think it's time the silent sentinel made a physical appearance. Of course, Mr. Vance, Marcus replied. Shall I prepare the termination dockets? Not yet, I said, watching the Uber pull up to the curb. I want her to get comfortable first. I want her to feel the weight of the world at her feet. It makes the fall so much more educational. I climbed into the back of the basic Toyota Camry, the driver looking at my old sweater with a hint of pity. Sarah was watching from the window, a smirk of triumph on her face. She thought she had won. She thought she had finally pruned the dead wood from her life. She had no idea that the tree she was standing on was about to be felled, and I was the one holding the axe. The Uber dropped me off at a modest park 3 blocks away. Once the car disappeared around the corner, a black Mercedes class pulled up to the curb. Marcus, my chief of staff for the last 20 years, stepped out and opened the door. Rough morning, sir, he asked, taking my worn suitcase as if it were a fragile artifact. Educational, Marcus, I replied, settling into the heated leather seat. It's amazing how people treat you when they think you have nothing left to offer. It's the ultimate stress test for character. Sarah and Mark failed. The board is assembled for Monday, Marcus said, handing me a sleek tablet. I've also flagged the hiring file for Sarah Vance. It seems she was fast, tracked by the regional VP, a man named Miller. There are some irregularities in her submitted portfolio. I scrolled through the digital documents. Sarah had claimed she was bringing a whale client with her, a massive logistics firm called Triton Global. The problem? Triton Global is a subsidiary of Vance Holdings. My holdings, she was selling my own assets back to the company I just bought, using them as leverage to secure her senior position and a massive signing bonus. It was more than just arrogance. It was a breach of fiduciary duty before she even walked through the door. She's bold, I mused. She's gambling that the merger chaos will mask the fact that she doesn't actually have the signatures from Triton. She's planning to secure them during her first week. What are your instructions, sir? Let her have her first day. I said, looking out the window as we passed the gleaming glass tower of Sterling Associates. Let her sign the onboarding indemnification paperwork. Let her take the company credit card. I want her fully committed to the fraud before we pull the rug. In the meantime, I want a forensic audit of Miller's department. If he's fast, tracking people based on phantom clients, he's is likely taking kickbacks. Over the next 48 hours, I lived a double life to Sarah and Mark. I was likely a sad old man sitting in a cramped room in an assisted living facility. Mark sent one solitary text, "Hope you're settling in. Don't call me for a while. Sarah needs to focus on her first week. I'll send the rest of your clothes by mail." I didn't reply. I was too busy in a high-security suite at the St. Regis, reviewing leveraged buyout structures and signing off on a recapitalization plan that would effectively strip Miller and his cronies of their voting rights. Monday morning arrived. Sarah posted a photo on social media. I viewed it through a burner account. It was a selfie in front of the Sterling Associates logo. Caption started from the bottom. "Now I'm here finally, away from the dead weight and ready to lead. Success is the best revenge." She had no idea how right she was. I arrived at the Sterling building at 9 a.m., wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that had been sitting in my city apartment for years. I didn't enter through the main lobby. I took the private elevator to the executive floor. In the boardroom, the tension was thick. Miller and the other partners were nervous. They knew a mystery buyer had snatched up 51 of the company, but they hadn't met the Apex representative yet. I sat in the observation lounge, behind the frosted glass, watching the main office floor through the one-way mirror. I saw Sarah. She was strutting through the cubicles, barking orders at a junior analyst. She looked vibrant, powerful, and utterly predatory. She was in her element, basking in a status she hadn't earned. "Mr. Miller is calling the meeting to order," Marcus whispered. "Wait," I said. "I want to see her first presentation. She's scheduled to pitch the Triton Global acquisition to the junior board at 10:30. "Isn't she?" "Yes, sir. She's already in the conference room." I watched through the camera feed as Sarah stood at the head of a long table. She looked confident. "The Triton account is a game changer," Sarah told the junior partners. "I have a personal relationship with the board. With my lead, Sterling will see a 15 increase in AM assets under management within the first quarter. I've already drafted the letter of intent." One of the junior partners, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, frowned. "The LOI requires a signature from the parent company, Vance Holdings. Do you have that?" Sarah didn't blink. "It's in process." "I have verbal confirmation from the principal's son." She meant Mark. She was planning to use my son to forge or manipulate my consent, assuming I was too senile to notice a few missing signatures from my dusty ledgers. "That's enough," I said to Marcus. I stood up and straightened my tie. The time for gathering evidence was over. The silent sentinel was about to become very, very loud. "Marcus, inform Mr. Miller that the majority shareholder is ready to introduce himself, and tell him I'd like Sarah Vance to be present for the strategy alignment meeting. After all, she's our star hire." As I walked toward the boardroom doors, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the house. It was about the fact that they had forgotten that respect isn't something you outgrow. I pushed the doors open. The room went silent. Miller stood up, a fake smile plastered on his face. "Ah, you must be the representative from Apex. Welcome, welcome." We were just discussing our new growth strategy. Sarah was standing near the back, her eyes widening as she saw me. She let out a small, involuntary laugh, the kind of laugh people use when they think they've seen a ghost. "Arthur," she stammered, her power facade cracking, "what are you doing here? Did you follow me?" "Security. This man is. He's a disgruntled relative. He's not supposed to be on this floor." Miller looked confused. "Sarah, do you know this gentleman? He's my father-in-law," she said, her voice rising in panic. "He's senile. He must have slipped past the front desk." "Arthur, leave right now or I'll have you arrested." I didn't look at her. I walked straight to the head of the table, the seat Miller had been occupying, and pulled it out. Actually, Miller, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden hush of the room, I think you'll find my name is on the articles of incorporation for the holding company that now owns your mortgage, your fleet of company cars, and 51 of the chair you're currently sitting in. I sat down and looked Sarah directly in the eye. And as for you, Sarah, we need to talk about your material misrepresentations regarding Triton Global, because as the chairman of Vance Holdings, I don't recall giving you a verbal confirmation for anything other than your departure from my house. The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might faint. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. The boardroom air felt like it had been sucked out by a vacuum. Miller was frozen, his hand still hovering over a stack of files. Sarah's mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. She looked like a fish gasping for air on a dry dock. Arthur, Sarah finally whispered, her voice cracking. This is some kind of sick joke. You're a retiree. You spend your days pruning roses. You're not a majority shareholder. I leaned back in the plush leather chair, the chair that cost more than the Uber she had summoned to kick me out. I gestured to Marcus. Marcus, would you mind providing Mrs. Vance with a copy of the Schedule 13D filing and the shareholder registry? Marcus stepped forward and slid a thick blue-bound folder across the mahogany table. It landed in front of Sarah with a heavy thud. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The gold-embossed seal of the Apex Trust on the cover was enough. Miller, I said, turning my gaze to the regional VP. He was sweating now, a dark stain blooming on his silk collar. I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing the books you've been keeping. It seems you've been quite creative with your operating expenses and your recent hiring spree, specifically the fast-tracking of senior directors based on unverified client leads, suggests a desperate attempt to inflate the company's valuation before the merger. Sir, I can explain. Miller stammered. Sarah came with the highest recommendations. Recommendations from whom? I interrupted. From my son, a man who hasn't worked a full fiscal quarter in 3 years? Or perhaps from the Triton Global Board? That's interesting, considering I am the board of Triton Global, and I don't recall meeting Sarah for a pitch. In fact, the only pitch she gave me lately was about which assisted living facility has the best pudding. The room was silent. The other board members, seasoned men and women who smelled blood in the water, began to shift away from Miller and Sarah as if they were radioactive. Sarah finally found her voice, but it wasn't the voice of a senior director. It was the shrill, desperate voice of a woman who felt the floor vanishing beneath her. You did this on purpose, she screamed, slamming her hands on the table. You hid this. You lived in our house, acted like a burden. Let us pay for your life, all while you were sitting on billions? That's sick, Arthur. That's manipulative. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I spoke with the quiet, crushing weight of a man who owns the building. I didn't hide anything, Sarah. I simply lived a quiet life. I gave you and Mark a house. I gave you my time. I gave you the chance to be a family. You were the one who decided that a person's value is measured solely by their net worth. You were the one who decided that, because I didn't brag about my status, I was useful. You didn't see a father-in-law. You saw a liability. I stood up slowly, the movement commanding the room. You wanted to move into the stratosphere, Sarah. Well, here we are. But the thing about the stratosphere is that there's no oxygen. And right now, you're suffocating. I looked at Miller. Mr. Miller, your resignation is accepted, effective immediately. We will be conducting a clawback on your last 3 years of bonuses due to the irregularities Marcus found. If you cooperate with the audit, we might skip the criminal referral for embezzlement. Miller didn't even argue. He grabbed his briefcase and bolted from the room. Then I turned back to Sarah. She was shaking. As for you, Mrs. Vance, Your employment contract with Sterling Associates contained a very specific morality clause and a section on material misrepresentation. By claiming to represent Triton Global, you committed fraudulent inducement. Not only is your employment terminated, but I've instructed our legal team to file a civil suit for damages to the company's reputation. You can't do this, she whimpered. Mark is your son. You're going to destroy our lives. Where are we supposed to go? We already signed the papers for the new house in the Heights. We put a non-refundable deposit down using the signing bonus. That bonus was issued based on a lie, I said coldly. The company will be reclaiming those funds by noon today. I believe that leaves you with, based on the asset freeze I initiated on the joint accounts this morning due to the investigation. It leaves you with nothing. Arthur, please, she begged, reaching across the table. We're family. Family? I asked, tilting my head. 10 minutes, Sarah. That's what you gave me. 10 minutes to get off your porch. I'm giving you 5 minutes to get out of my building. Marcus, escort her out, and ensure her security badge is deactivated before she hits the lobby. I stood by the floor, ceiling window of the chairman's office, watching the tiny figures on the street below. I saw Sarah emerge from the revolving doors. She looked small. She looked lost. She was clutching her designer handbag as if it were a life raft, but in a world where you've burned every bridge, a handbag is just a piece of dead leather. My phone buzzed. It was Mark. I let it ring for 3 beats before answering. Dad. His voice was trembling. Dad, what's going on? Sarah just called me. She's hysterical. She says you own Sterling? She says we're being sued? Dad, the bank just called about the mortgage on the house. They said the title has been flagged for conveyance fraud because the original gift deed had a reversionary interest clause. Hello, Mark, I said, my voice steady. I see you've finally found my number. I thought I was blocked, Dad. Sarah said. Look, I'm sorry. We were stressed. We didn't mean those things. You meant them, Mark. You just didn't think there would be a price tag attached to them. You allowed your wife to treat your father like a servant in a home I built for you. You stood by while she threw me out into the rain. You were willing to let me rot in a low-rent facility because I was embarrassing to your new social circle. We can fix this. Dad, just drop the suit. Tell the bank it was a mistake. Move you into the big suite. Do whatever you want. It's too late for fixing, Mark. The lesson I'm teaching you today is one you should have learned as a child. Integrity is the only currency that doesn't devalue. You traded yours for a shiny suit and a seat at a table that wasn't yours. Now you have neither. Dad, please. We have nothing. You have exactly what you earned, Mark. You have each other. And you have the 10 minutes of stratosphere life you wanted so badly. Enjoy the view on the way down. I hung up. I didn't feel the rush of joy I thought I would. There is no true victory in watching your own son fail, but there is a necessity in it. Sometimes, to save a structure, you have to let the rot burn away. Marcus entered the room quietly. The board is ready for the restructuring vote, Mr. Vance. And the movers have finished transporting your belongings from the guest suite to the penthouse. Thank you, Marcus. I walked over to my desk and picked up a small wooden carving. It was a bird I had been working on in the garden when Sarah had interrupted me to tell me I was useless. It was unfinished, rough around the edges. I looked at the carving, then out at the sprawling city. I had all the power in the world. I could buy and sell every person in that boardroom 10 times over. But as I sat in the silence of my multi-million-dollar office, I realized that the most valuable thing I ever owned was the pancakes I made for my grandkids on Sunday mornings. A thing Sarah and Mark had thrown away because they couldn't see the man behind the sweater. I set the carving down on the marble desk. Marcus? Yes, sir? Call the assisted living facility I was supposed to go to. Send them a donation, a large one. Tell them it's from a man who finally understands the value of a quiet life. Of course, sir. And what about the house? I looked at the deed on my desk. the house where my son was currently packing his bags in a panic. Sell it, I said, and donate the proceeds to a charity for homeless seniors. It's time that house was filled with people who actually appreciate a roof over their heads. I turned back to the window. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows over the city. I was Arthur Vance. I was a senior consultant. I was a secret creditor. I was the majority shareholder, but as the lights of the city flickered on, I realized I was finally something else too. I was free.